So true holy hatred, so we kind of talked already about the sinful one, right? The sin is against a reasonable love for ourselves. We should reasonably love ourselves because we were willed by God, and God did create us, and what we have is a gift from God, whether we're really good at something or we're not. You know, certain people that always break things. That's annoying. You know that they're always breaking things, but you know when they really don't mean to be breaking things because they're just clumsy. In a way, it really is endearing because it's frustrating they're always breaking stuff, but you know how much they must be suffering for it. And when you see somebody who humbly breaks stuff and just like picks it back up and tries to go about their way, you see that violence they have to do to themselves to just keep being humble and go forward. We had a brother in the friary who he broke everything all the time. And I remember when he first got to Italy. In Italy, you drink wine. Wine at every meal except for breakfast, right? So there's always the house wine. And on days of penance, you didn't put wine out. But there's always a bottle of wine on the table. And it's just a common thing. That's what you do there, right? So we had 30 of us there in the friary. And so he's got this little cart. He's wheeling it out. And I was just getting out of an exam. This was our seminary house. I was getting out of an exam, and I'm kind of walking past this corridor where I can see all the way down to where the refectory is. That's where we eat. And the brother's out there getting ready for lunch, right? So he's the cook, and he's got to set out all the bottles of wine. He's sitting. So I see him. He's somebody that always breaks everything. So he's got the cart, and he's walking out, and he's pushing the cart. He's going around. He's being really, really careful because he knows he's somebody who breaks stuff all the time. So he's being real careful. And then the side of the cart hits the wall, and all the wine goes flying off, and you just hear, "Oh!" And then it's just all this stuff shattering and breaking on the ground. It got to the point, because he did this all the time, but he was a very humble, good friar. He didn't do any of this intention. He was really trying, and still he broke all the wine. We had this practice of, when you do something like that in the community, when we're all there at table, the brother would come in and kneel. You'll see, if you see, there's even pictures of Padre Pio would do this, just a Franciscan thing. You kneel in front of the community, you put your arms out, I ask pardon of God, and you my brothers. And so he had to do this almost every day for breaking all the wine in the house. It's just the hardest thing not to start laughing. It's a serious moment. We're all giggling, because every day he broke something. So I broke all the plates in the house. So even these things can be it can be a great trial for us. They can bring great joy to others because they see how humbly and meekly somebody can accept those things and endure them. And so God may have given us some kind of fault that we're not sinful. It's not sinful when you're doing something. You're trying your hardest and you just can't, you just keep breaking the bottles of wine, whatever. But you see the way the good brother humbly accepts it, keeps trying. These are virtuous things, and it's a good virtuous example. So we never know those faults that we have or the difficulties that we have, how precious they are to people around us if we're exercising them as virtue. That's why we can't beat ourselves up. You don't know why God gave you that. True holy hatred consists of three things. The first is in never desiring or accepting anything that can give you pleasure. Now that's what we talked about earlier. It sounds crazy. Not accepting, this friar's nuts. Not accepting anything that gives you pleasure. Now, never desiring or accepting anything that gives you pleasure. It's what we talked about. I gave a long example for it today. That means there are a lot of good things in this world, but you don't necessarily need all the good things, do you? You have all that you need. So the desiring them is that example we gave earlier about going to that one restaurant. I've been thinking about it let's go to that. I really like that seafood. What is it called? The jambalaya. What do they have here? The stuff with, what'd you make for us? Gumbo. They got the I got that seafood gumbo, and they have the best gumbo, and I want to get. So all you're thinking about is going to that place for that gumbo. This not desiring these things, you have desires for them because we're human, but you don't have to act on those things. And we'll get into why. So what is intended, except desiring those things, except for those things that cannot be admitted, that we cannot admit to desire or to take without offending God. This is the thing. We're setting ourselves up so that we never offend God. we deny ourselves things if it does not offend God. Because there's certain things that we can accept. It's not sinful to have dinner at your favorite restaurant and to eat gumbo, the gumbo that you really like. It's not a sinful thing. There's nothing wrong with doing that. This is called Christian asceticism. Christian asceticism. It's what the Desert Fathers practice. It's what a good Christian who wants to arrive at perfection. Here, I'm sure I have something in here that there's a definition here. I'll have to find it. We'll get to it. So, what is intended here is to govern the government of our passions. We're learning how to, remember we talked about brother ass. We're learning how to dominate brother ass. Brother ass is our fallen nature. It's our flesh. Our flesh. Inside of us, there's always that war St. Paul talks about, the flesh and the spirit. Our spirit is either going to save our flesh, and our flesh will participate in the glory of heaven, or our spirit will succumb to the demands of the flesh, and your spirit will suffer the consequences of eternal hell. Those are the only two options you have. That's why you exist. You don't exist for the work you do, and for the volunteering, and for talking to your neighbor whenever you meet him out at the mailbox. You don't exist for these things. You exist to find out which will you choose. Will you live for the flesh, or will you live for the spirit? If you live for the spirit, your flesh will participate. If you live for the flesh, your spirit is doomed. And that's that battle that goes on in every single one of us our whole life. I really want that gumbo. Your body is telling you it wants the gumbo. It's not your spirit. Your spirit doesn't care about eating gumbo. Your spirit cares about the people who might have invited you to that restaurant to have a conversation with them. But your spirit doesn't care about gumbo. Your spirit doesn't care about sleeping in. Your spirit doesn't care about having an extra slice of pizza when you've already had 5. Okay? The spirit doesn't care about that stuff. The flesh does. What we're talking about here is putting the flesh in check so that the spirit learns to dominate that flesh, preparing it for heaven. This is asceticism. It's a discipline. It's Christian discipline. That's all it is. We're just not used to hearing it, so don't think Friar's crazy. I'm just telling you about what Christian asceticism is. It's this discipline that we can become soldiers. We talk about that, being soldiers for Christ at our confirmation, but we know those are just words. We don't really show up and practice and prepare for the battlefield. We just like to say that. But really, we can do it. We can practice. We can practice and go out on the battlefield. It's what we can actually do. And this is this holy hatred of self is what it is. Our desire must be to take that which is God's will, whether good or bad, pleasurable or not. We're not to fly from all things that are not pleasurable. And we do, don't we? I was talking to a pastor the other day in a different location. But he said since coronavirus has died down a bit and we're allowed to go to church again, a lot of his parishioners didn't return because they wanted to start going to the church because they're not able to use their church anymore because there's too many people with the distancing and stuff. So they use this outdoor thing. So obviously there's no air conditioning. He lost most of his parishioners to air conditioning. What do you do? So maybe you have older parishioners, and that makes sense. Maybe it's just too hot in the summer months. It's too muggy during the summer months. Okay. But it didn't sound to me like that was actually what was going on. It just sounded like there was people that do not want to allow their flesh to feel certain uncomforts or discomforts. To seek pleasure for pleasure's sake is not evil in and of itself, but the hatred of self, the most ancient ascetical rule for the acquisition of perfection, demands of the soul that it flee as an enemy of all pleasure that is not imposed on it by the higher consideration of the pleasure of God